Kia ora, I'm Vic Francis, and welcome to this episode of the Four Pastors podcast. I'm combining my background as a journalist with decades of pastoring, national church leadership, and practicing as a supervisor and spiritual director to champion pastors and their holy calling in an uncertain world. Let's face it, as pastors, church life can become all-consuming. Working with the joys and challenges of our own congregation week by week doesn't give us a lot of time to think much bigger. Today, though, we're lifting our heads a bit and imagining what it might be like to have a heart not only for our own church, but for all churches and the communities that we live in, working together for the flourishing of our town or city. Welcome to Four Pastors, Heart for a City. My guests today are Amy and Andrew Dishroon, lead pastors of Engage Church in Napier, and Ben Mai, manager of Auckland Church Network. Welcome to all of you to the Heart for a City episode of Four Pastors. And I want to start today by finding out a little bit about you. And I'm going to begin with you, Amy and Andrew in Napier. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would. What makes you tick?
Yeah, thank you. What a privilege to be here. A little bit about myself. Obviously, my name's Andrew, and I'm married to my lovely wife, Amy, and we have two daughters, Lily and Pippa, who are 16 and 14. And we've been in the Hawke's Bay now for 5 years or so and co-leading Engage Church together. And Amy's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Hi, Vic, and everybody else listening. It's so lovely to be here. Yeah, Andrew and I, we work as co-leaders of Engage Church in Napier here, and we have been working at the same desk across from each other for over a decade, and we just love it. I know that's sickly for so many people, but we love working together, and we love the Lord's Church. We're both raised in families where our parents were the first to be at church and the last to leave. So we, have such a deep love for church and people, really. And I have another love, which is, aside from my gorgeous children, of course, I have 20 David Austin roses in my garden, and they keep me busy, and I just love them. I love the stages and the seasons of watching the roses bloom and then cutting them back, and something therapeutic about it. So,
and I love seeing people come to Jesus. I love salvation. I love just being part of the bigger picture and the bigger, wider church. And I just am passionate about God's church. And also I love playing golf. I can't play basketball anymore. I'm getting a bit too old for that. So now I'm out on the golf course. So all you pastors out there, you want to play golf, hit me up. I'd love to play.
There you go. You can make an appointment with Andrew next time you come to Napier. Ben, you're in Auckland. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Hey, so good to be with you, Vic, and likewise, Andrew and Amy. So my name is Ben Mai, and I work for a movement we established about 4 or 5 years ago that's called Auckland Church Network. And it's really all about mobilizing the church to work together for the spiritual and social flourishing of the city. And so when I say church there, I'm meaning like capital C church. So Christians, local churches, Christian not-for-profits, Christian business people working together for the shalom of our city. Personally, I live in the Auckland suburb of Mangere Bridge. I'm married to the beautiful Amy, and we have the delight of parenting twins, a boy and a girl who turn 4 tomorrow, actually. So looking forward to a big day tomorrow. Wow. And we love investing into our local community in Mangere Bridge, and invariably we receive much more blessing in return really as well. What makes me, Andrew, I might have to come down to Napier and you can take me out of the golf course. It's been a little while. I love my golf, but it's been a while since I got out there. Yeah, enjoy being active. I enjoy running and hiking in the bush, things like that as well. But also just love that sense of like community feel around local church, obviously expanding that to the city as well. And obviously the church is full of people. So try to do my best to love people and certainly receive a lot more in return.
Well, I want to welcome all three of you onto the podcast. Ben, who I know quite well from my time in pastoring in Auckland. Amy and Andrew, who I've only met because of the opportunity of doing the podcast together. It's lovely to have you here. I'm calling this episode of the podcast Heart for a City. And my motivation in inviting you all on is my hunch that doing it alone, like each church in its own silo, hasn't really worked all of that well. That together we're surely greater than the sum of our individual parts, and that it's more honouring to God when we do it together anyway. And so, Ben, maybe we'll start with you. When you hear the phrase heart for a city, what does that bring to your mind?
Great question, Vic. Yeah, heart for a city. I mean, I think when I combine it with church, to be honest, it's part of who the church is designed to be. I think part of the calling of a local church is to develop a heart for its city. And so obviously when I think heart, when I hear heart, I think emotion, I think compassion. Jesus wept over the city of Jerusalem. He wept over other communities too. And so that's, I think, part of it as well. And one other aspect that comes to mind is the late American pastor Timothy Keller. And he has a quote, he says, "God loves cities because they are filled with his image bearers." And so I think having a heart for a city means rejoicing in its beauty, in its diversity, in its potential, and its people. I think it also means weeping over its injustices, its poverty, its systemic issues, and also over its people as well. And I think a great question to stop and ask and ponder on and reflect on is this: do I love my city? Do I love my city? And I think loving my city, similar to loving a person, means rejoicing in the good moments. It's being proud of who your city is, its background, its achievements. And again, on the flip side, it's feeling the pain of the tough moments, the heartbreaking tragedies that occur, the devastating natural disasters, the obvious lack of Jesus in people's hearts and actions as well. But this question of do I love my city is, I think, a great one to reflect on and kind of dwell on as well. When I say city, that could be a town. It could be Huntley or Geraldine. You might think of that as your city.
Sure.
You could be in a medium-sized city like Napier, where Andrew and Amy are, or Nelson or Palmerston North. That's your city. Or I guess you could be in a larger city, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch. And so you might be thinking of your part of the city, for example, the North Shore or Lower Hutt or something like that. So I guess I'm defining that as geographically, it's the local mission field of your church.
Yeah, I think we can take that as read, can't we? It's something bigger than yourself, bigger than your own church, bigger than your own local community. I'm sort of wondering, as pastors, if we can make that step from saying, well, how is my church going? How did it go on Sunday? What am I hoping for this Sunday? And start asking questions, something like, how is God's church going in my city? What changes when we make that leap, do you think, Ben?
Yeah. Because obviously, 95, 99% of the time, as pastors, we're probably asking, or at least thinking along the lines of the first question, how is my church going? And that's very understandable. So I think a real challenge to this is that as a pastor, that's essentially your job description. How is my church going? That's essentially where you're accountable to your governance team, to your leadership or eldership team. And so that's kind of the default question. But when you shift focus from your local church to God's church in your city, I think potentially your entire ministry perspective transforms from internal competition to kingdom collaboration. And I think that's quite a powerful shift. And so in some ways, it really breaks down denominational walls and in some ways expands your mission from building an organization to transforming a region. And I think that comes with some beautiful kind of aspects, or certainly real potential to it. I think there's a real potential to move from kind of a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. So you think of just things like celebrating kingdom wins. And I guess when I think of that, I think the growth of other gospel preaching churches is you celebrate that as a victory rather than a threat to your attendance numbers. Yes. You start to think about sharing local resources. So you begin to freely share venues or volunteers or funding to tackle large citywide problems together. You can eliminate duplication of ministry, I guess. Congregations can stop launching competing programs and perhaps instead think about going into existing or successful community initiatives. And so I think these will be some of the things that come to mind when we change that question. It's quite a mindset change, but I think the potential there is huge.
It feels like a biblical concept as well, Ben. How would you sort of link it scripturally?
I think there's probably two perhaps main aspects to that. There's a city aspect and there's a unity aspect as well. And so I think if we look at a biblical basis for pastors thinking about the city, there's so many aspects where God's word shows us that he loves cities. The Bible starts in a garden and it finishes in a city, the heavenly city. And I think another key verse there is in Jeremiah chapter 29. So this is a famous stanza where the Israelites are captive in Babylon and God instructs them to seek the welfare of the city that they are placed in, to seek its shalom, to seek its spiritual and social flourishing. And he says, or he tells the Israelites to pray for the city, for if it prospers, you too shall prosper. So I think there's a strong kind of city aspect that comes throughout the narrative of Scripture. And then similarly, or the second thing I mentioned is that unity aspect as well. And so again, if we look at a biblical basis for pastors thinking beyond their own congregation and partnering with other pastors and other congregations, a key passage really is in John chapter 17. And this is Jesus' famous prayer the night before he was crucified. You know, of all of the things he could have prayed for, one of the key ones is that he prays for the unity of believers, that they may be one, just as the Father and I are one. And I love that it comes with a so that, just after that, and in verse 21 it says, so that the world may know that you sent me and that I love them just as you have loved me. So it's like our unity actually is a witness towards God and towards the love of God's Son, Jesus, for each of us as well. And I think there's something beautiful and precious about that as well.
I want to go over to Amy and Andrew because you're in Napier, you're pastoring a church, and we're going to hear more of the story of what's happened in Napier, which has been rather wonderful over time. But Amy, maybe if we think a little bit about what we might lose when we're a church that just focuses on its own patch, what do we miss when we get too inward looking?
Oh, my first response is friendship. We lose friendship with each other, which at the end of the day, we're one big family of God in Christ. And there's so many wonderful people in churches all around our regions to grow in those friendships. And I think also as churches, when you have this, dare I say, inward, self-absorbed focus, it can be a breeding ground for pride, and you can start thinking that nobody does this as well as us, or nobody cares as much, and it can grow an overinflated sense of who you are as a church. Whereas when you're around other churches, you're connected with other pastors, you grow a love for them and for their church and their people, and in that also it overflows towards your whole city as well, of people, to the point where you want every church to be full and you want every church to be thriving, because at the end of the day, there are so many other churches doing things better than we are, and not every church is going to fit every person. So we need all the different pastors and we need all the different people. So being connected with each other, I think, is so beneficial. You get collaboration, you get appreciation, you get to see the different diverse sides and parts of God reflected throughout the body, and you get togetherness.
Amy, your relationship with other pastors, how fruitful and how rich have you found that over time?
Oh, it's the best. I love it. I think relationally, it's the only room that I get to sit in that everybody else in the room truly understands what we're doing, what we're going through. They understand the challenges of pastoring and people, and they also understand the wonderful wins and celebration moments as well. I sat in a meeting last year. We gather monthly as pastors, and it's just such a blessing. And I sat in the meeting last year, and we were going through something difficult, and it was our first time of facing this type of difficult for us as leaders. And we'd started with the scripture and kind of opened it up. And as I began sharing, I felt really teary, and the tears did just start to fall down my face. And this group of maybe 15, 20 pastors around paused and we prayed. And when they prayed, which was so beautiful and ministered to me so much, but I just remember so clearly one of the pastors who'd been pastoring for decades now, and I really, really look up to them. And they just said, I've faced this 3 times in my pastoring journey. Yeah. And then he went on and he prayed for me and he prayed over me, and this protection and love and care. And when I heard that, it was like, okay, he's walked through this and he survived. Mm-hmm. He's walked through it and he's grown and he stayed. And maybe if other people can walk through it, we can walk through it too. And that's just so beneficial to, particularly when you're young and pastoring and you're learning things. And, but we can also learn from those who are fresh. And when they walk in the room and they have this beautiful sense of naivety of pastoring as well, where they're just excited about everything and want to, save the world and do all the things. It's good for us as well because it gets us pumped up and zealous. And we also have in our region in the Hawke's Bay, our youth pastors gather regularly as well, which is so cool. And they come together in the room and they're getting excited and they're carrying this bigger picture for the city too. And it's been so beautiful to watch our youth pastors, Ollie and Juliana, grow in their love for not just the youth that they're leading, but the youth across the city as well, and their relationships with other youth pastors too. So I think the verse in 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 8, I just love so much, but it talks about people saying, we loved you so much that we share with you not only the gospel, but with you our lives as well. And that's the gift of journeying with other pastors, is that you get to share your lives together.
That's such a great story. Andrew, I'm sort of thinking about that competition thing that sometimes can creep in. Why do you think that competition, or say even comparison, does creep into our ministry? If we talk about it theoretically, we say, of course it shouldn't. But in fact, it is there sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, I think pressure to succeed is something that we all face as pastors. It's very easy to get caught up in the dream. I think we all have vision. I think we all have a desire to see our churches and our ministries grow. We want to see more people come to the kingdom, and we want healthy bank balances. We want buildings to move forward and its look and its design and their spaces. And I don't think any of those things are wrong. I think sometimes we just put them in the wrong order. And so I think pressure to succeed is something that we put on ourselves. I think also that at the end of the day, we're all human and we have insecurities, and ego has something to play in that. And even we also like to preserve dignity. And what I mean by that is it's a lot easier to say that your ministry is thriving than it is to talk about it struggling. And I think the citywide meeting together is important because you actually get in the room and you understand each other's hearts and you hear the vulnerability and you recognize that actually they're just my brother and they're my sister. And I think sometimes also theological differences, maybe not so much with competition, but with comparison, as sometimes just the different styles or the different flavors, just being different can create a bit of a comparison in the opposite way. And so I think that may mean that we're not willing to sit in the same room as another denomination or another movement or another leader, and we compare ourselves to them thinking, oh, okay, my church is thriving and your church is not, or that must be because of. And I think when we actually get over ourselves and humble ourselves and submit ourselves to Christ, and I think Ben, you said it so well in John 17, and Jesus is talking about being one with the Father, and that then his wish for us, his prayer for us is that we would be one like that with each other. It's like covenant language, it's marriage language, it's oneness language, and that can only happen at heart level. And so I'm even thinking with my wife, I'm not in competition with her, and I don't compare myself with her. I can't afford to. Instead, I need to be connected to her.
And what does it feel like sort of deep down when you celebrate someone else's success in ministry and not just your own, where somehow you find the capacity to go beyond just yourself?
Yeah, it's really good. I was reminded recently of Ryan Fox. Obviously, I talked about golf before, and he won the British golf tournament and he's the World Player of the Year. And he did all the work, he did all the practice. It was him and his caddy that did everything. And yet, it felt like a win for New Zealand. And when I think of another church or another ministry thriving, it's actually a win for the kingdom. And their win is ultimately our win. Every time a person gets saved, every time a person gets baptized, every time someone moves a step closer to Jesus, and it doesn't have to be in my church and it doesn't have to be in our ministry, it's another blow for the enemy in our city. And so it's really important that we celebrate each other's successes and not just our own, because what we're trying to do is move the kingdom forward in our city. And so if that means that another church is thriving, we're going to celebrate that. We're going to get on board with that. We're going to pray for them. And obviously everything we talk about today, our words are going to get tested. And so hopefully we can humble ourselves enough and always celebrate even when you feel those feelings. Because as humans, we are going to feel those feelings, but we submit them and go, look, I'm not going to operate out of the flesh. I'm going to operate out of the spirit.
Ben, Andrew touches on this as a subject, but what do you think pastors miss when they're standing so close or too close to their own church to be able to see a bigger picture for a city or some wider concept?
Yeah, first thing to say for every pastor listening, I'm pretty sure it'll be true that when they think of their own church, there's too much to do and not enough time to do it. So there's always this tension of your own church just needs so much, and there's so much that can be poured out and is being poured out. In all of our roles, I guess there's always blind spots, eh? And I think in these cases, the blind spots can limit the ultimate impact of a local church. So I think from a community perspective, if a pastor's too focused on their own church, they can miss out on changing demographics in the city. Our cities are changing. They're changing fast, ethnically, economically, generationally. And I guess there's a risk there that the outreach methods of a church become outdated. I think along those lines, there's potential to miss actual local hurt, community pain points, hidden poverty, rising divorce rates, youth loneliness. They can easily stay invisible behind attendance numbers on a Sunday. And of course, there can be unreached kind of pockets of culture and so on, entire neighborhoods or subcultures in a city who don't fit into the church's existing demographic, just get overlooked and missed in the bigger picture as well. So I think there's some aspects there around community. I guess perhaps a couple of other things as well. I think that a pastor can so easily just carry the heavy weight of trying to provide every ministry program alone, instead of looking to partner with nearby churches and work out a better, more coordinated strategic system there. So I guess just think around the kind of the broader move of God as well, is that pastors can miss out celebrating and learning from unique revivals or trends or breakthroughs that are happening in other neighboring churches or in other neighboring denominations as well. But yeah, I think there's a lot of bigger context that we can learn when, as a pastor, we perhaps start thinking ourselves not just as a pastor of our church, but as a pastor of our city. And what does that look like when we start thinking in those frames?
Well, it's a challenging and thought-provoking subject, and I think it's a good point for us to take a break. When we return, we're going to hear the story of the Napier floods and the way that the church rallied around the community in a time of trauma and of really great need. Amy and Andrew were a big part of that, so we will be right back. Hi, Vic Francis here, and I hope you're enjoying this week's Four Pastors podcast. Over this series, we're exploring issues pastors face and hearing from well-known and lesser-known Kiwi pastors for collective wisdom and inspiration. If you're enjoying this podcast, there are several things you could do to help. First, follow, subscribe, like, and pass this on to other pastors and church leaders. Second, email me on vic@solace.org.nz with feedback and who and what you would like to see on future episodes. Third, if you're really excited, support this podcast by contributing to the Four Pastors account on Patreon. I'm passionate about championing pastors and their holy calling in an uncertain world, and your enthusiasm will help this podcast continue to inspire, encourage, and help us all keep saying yes to the call of God on our lives. Now, back to the podcast. Welcome back to the Four Pastors podcast, and an episode we're calling Heart for a City. Now, Andrew, take us back to the Hawke's Bay floods in 2023. What happened back then?
Yeah, so obviously it was a pretty major natural disaster for us in this region. But on the day where we live in Napier, we woke up and the sun was shining. The cyclone had moved through the night and didn't think much of it. Amy and I thought, we better go check the church because where our church is located, it has been flooded before. And we jumped in the car and it's about a 7-minute drive and we head there and you can see that there's been definitely some trees that have fallen here or there, but nothing to suggest that the scale of the damage was what it was. And then we get an alert that the river had burst its banks and flooding is starting to take place and you need to evacuate. And then the cell phone reception drops out and before you know it, you look up in the sky and there's helicopters everywhere and you think, what's going on? And people are starting to already talk. And so people that know people, word gets around. Obviously, the communications are down, but word gets around pretty quickly that Estelle has been very badly flooded, that people have been rescued on top of roofs. And then you quickly find out that the land between Napier and Hastings called Pokapai, that it's been severely flooded as well, and people have been rescued off roofs. And so all of a sudden you're thrust into this moment. And I must admit, I was thinking a little bit of myself, ourselves as a family, as a dad and as a provider for, okay, we need to make sure that we've got food. We need to make sure that we've got everything we need. And I wasn't very wise and we had very little petrol. So there was a few things that I was like a little bit worried and concerned about. But then Amy, my lovely wife, was like, we've got to do something and we got to help. And that's where you jump in.
So, Amy, you came to the rescue. Tell us what happened next.
I had just read a book off my father-in-law's bookshelf, and it was called Understanding Leadership by Tom Marshall. It was written in the early 90s, and he talked all about having foresight and being an anticipator of things to come as a leader, like always being a few steps ahead. And so I had this in my mind, and I was like, we have to be a few steps ahead. We have an amazing church full of wonderful people who literally will jump in to help if they're led and had opportunity. So I was like, we have to be a few steps ahead. So at that point, we were like, all right, let's do something. So we just started checking on people and heading into really disaster relief, which wasn't something that we'd learned. We'd only been pastoring a few months at that point. But it was pretty amazing, though, because as soon as we had connection with other people, Pastor Bruce Collingwood, so he led the Napier Ministers Network at that time and has only recently passed it on to us, which is such a privilege. But he gathered us together very quickly as pastors. And so we all got in a room. We sat together. We hadn't had power for almost a week. None of us had showered because the water was very low and there was concern there. And so you just sit in the room, raw human. And when you are in crisis mode, you very quickly put aside your style or flavor or denominations or sizes of churches, and all of a sudden you're just like the family of God and let's work together. And we did do that. So we just started identifying who was going to do what as a city. And a beautiful organization called Convoy of Hope, they came and sat with us and they just made us feel like we could do it. They really empowered us and spiritual leaders in the church in our city. And so it was incredible. So like Equippers Church, they became like an evacuation center. They were housing people. Vineyard looked into like how could they short-term and long-term house people. Our Church Engaged became a distribution center. So we were gathering supplies from all around the country. Salvation Army was feeding people, and all these other churches I could list off were doing things. And so what we started doing as churches is we would just send whoever had those giftings or resources to that church. So we were sending people to go and help with the feeding, and we were bringing other people from other churches and helping us dig silt and help clear properties and things like that. We just shared everything. We shared money and people and tools, and it was amazing.
It sounds an incredible thing. Did it take place over days or did it take place over weeks and even months?
Yeah, the first couple of days initially was sorting your own church out. You got to make sure checking on your flock. There was a few people that we were concerned about. We knew of a family in our church, a couple who lived in a motorhome in Eskdale. And so straight away, we were just like, okay, what's happening with them? And then found out that they were okay. They did lose everything, but they were okay. And then we found out some other people needed rescuing as you found out more and more the scale of it. People were being helicoptered out. So once we kind of knew that everyone in our sort of immediate church were okay, and that took us a couple of days. But at the same time, we even got on the first day reports of a rest home that had been evacuated, and they got evacuated into a school hall. And so we went to the hall and
Went to the supermarket.
we went to the supermarket first, and we bought water, bottles of water and food and supplies. And the supermarket had a generator. And so it was there that then you could try and get news reports with Wi-Fi and stuff like that. And so everyone's packing out the supermarket. It was like what the end of the world would feel like. It was the closest thing to a war zone or that kind of feel. People were starting to fight over petrol and things like that. It was an interesting time. But in that time, we get to this rest home and you walk in, and that is probably when it really hit us that, wow, people need help and we want to be part. It's our job as the church to help people. And so as it went from one day, it turned into, okay, what does the need look like for today? And then what does the need look like for tomorrow? And after a week, then it became, okay, what is it going to be like for this week? And then it became, what is it going to look like for the month?
And as pastors, we continued to meet weekly. So we gathered together, we got together each week, we debriefed, we planned. and supported each other through that time, which was gold.
It sounds like a sort of experience that will last you for a lifetime or will mark you for a lifetime. Was there a moment that you thought, there's something happening here? This is something like I've never seen before.
Yeah, I think that moment came in actually in our first pastors meeting that we sat down, and I think I worked it out. We're back in the calendar, and it was only 6 days later. So the cyclone was on a Tuesday, and it's the following Monday, and we sat down in a room, and Convoy of Hope were in, they flew in, and one of the areas is they specialize in disaster relief, and they partner with churches to help you and in some ways resource you to go and do the work. So they sat down with us and just offered their help, but it really galvanized. I would say beforehand, I would have thought we were united, but it was in that moment you look across and you go, wow, we're in the thick of this. How are we going to help people? And I would say, fortunately, we had enough relational capital already at the bank to be able to launch from that.
Yeah, we really had relational unity. It just shifted to missional unity at that point.
Right. Okay. So you knew each other, you got on really well.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
you did your church perhaps individually, but then all of a sudden this is something bigger than any church, clearly bigger than any church. And so we have to do this together or it's just not going to work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like Amy just said that missional unity became vital. And so that missional unity, even talking the days, weeks, months leading after that, became clearer and clearer. And yet we stayed fluid. And so after about 6 months or so, those weekly meetings then became still monthly. But we worked really closely together for at least 2 years on cyclone cleanup. And it's still continuing on now. It's just now we know our roles within it, but we still work together as well.
It's a phenomenal story. How has it affected ongoing relationships between churches in the city?
Yeah, it's been beautiful. I think you do go deep in those kind of moments and the friendships go deeper as well. As churches, I think the gatherings together has increased significantly since then. We're gathering together unified as a city for prayer. We're gathering together for services, combined services, and we do that a few times a year. And we're also in progress at the moment for particularly Ben and Jonathan Dunn's encouragement as well in some of their training. We're working together as a city on what it looks like to collaborate on local mission work together. So we're pulling together who does what into one space so that as churches we can serve together more, which is very exciting.
Isn't that wonderful? I wonder too, do you think the community sees the church differently as a result of having been that unified force?
Yeah, I think it has. There's been examples when, through just your everyday life, you're out and about and you introduce yourself or you talk what you do and you mention your church's name and they're like, oh man, I saw you guys on social media. You guys did a lot during the cyclone. And so even at the end of last year, we partnered with another church, even in Hastings, to go help clean up a property for a family who have children with disabilities. And they're all overgrown, there was weeds everywhere. And it got to the point it was so overrun they couldn't maintain it anymore. And so we partnered with a church over there. And it's the same team that we had to go out and clean up still is now 3 years later, now cleaning up properties. In fact, we just did one this last Sunday. And we call it Serve Sunday. But we're now, who's the closest church to this property? Let's go partner with them and let's do it together so that if this person wants to go to church or if this family want to go to church, we want to connect them with the closest church. We don't want them to have to travel 20 minutes away to come to us. Yes. And so that's some of the fruit of the unity that we've seen in the city is that we all just want to get in there and help people.
I wonder also, how's it shaped your own ministries and your attitude to doing ministry, that sort of experience of working together?
Yeah, as Christian, you want to help and you want to do things. It's just how. And so I think what it's developed in us is a real quickness of seeing a need, meeting a need, and not getting too fussy about all the things in between. And so like Andrew said, so from what we started when the cyclone happened 3.5 years ago, we just continued and our church continues it on now. And I think that's been a beautiful extension of being the hands and feet of Jesus. And we personally just love it. The people you get to meet, so many people have joined our church from discovering this joyful, faith-filled community on their property, laughing and having fun together doing work, and other people who have a heart for community but maybe aren't connected into a church. They're like, I want to be part of that.
That is such a great story. Thank you. And Ben, maybe to look at it from a broader perspective, unity is so important, isn't it? Because when a crisis does come, it makes us ready, I suppose, to work together. We could look at it the other way as well. When a crisis comes, it creates unity that is obviously ongoing, as we're hearing about in the Napier situation. Such a wonderful thing for us to be exploring.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew and Amy. It's a stunning example. It's inspiring to hear again the Napier story. It's just beautiful. Just picking up on something Amy said right at the start there. Amy, you said that Bruce immediately called you together and into a room, and you came together as a group of Napier pastors. And I think in reality, Bruce can only do that, or you can only accept Bruce's invitation if there is already relational unity. Yeah. And so you went on to say that your relational unity then became missional unity. And so your unity really deepened in the midst of this crisis. And so I think there's something there around, it's brilliant to have that relational capital already in place that sets a brilliant platform. I also think that obviously in the midst of Napier in 2023, Christchurch back in 2011 and so on, there's these other examples of natural disasters where there's brilliant examples actually of churches coming together and responding to these crises. Another thing perhaps I just want to pick up on, I also think there's a range of slower moving crises in our cities. They're not in our face every day. They're not always headlining the news, but I think they are becoming more entrenched. There's homeless people living on our streets. There are families going without food. There's people of all ages who are socially isolated and incredibly lonely. There's older people literally dying of loneliness. There's domestic violence in households across our cities. There's the mental and emotional well-being of our youth at an all-time low. And responding effectively to these crises, I believe, is part of the calling of the church. It's part of loving our neighbour. And it's a really incredible opportunity to be the hands and feet in the good news of Jesus amongst our cities. I don't think any one church in any city in New Zealand has the resources or capacity to respond to all of these. But by working together, each one playing a part, I really believe that we can make a difference. And so I think in and amongst our local pastors networks, as we go about day to day, month to month, meeting to meeting, I think there's a challenge there, is that how do we turn our relational unity into missional unity for the sake of our cities? Because there is so much need across our cities.
Ben, you have a bit of a bird's eye view from your work with the Auckland Church Network, and no doubt you have a bit of an eye on the rest of the country as well, because you'll be in relationship with people. What have you learned from watching churches that do respond and have responded during difficult seasons and, as you say, more slow-moving things that don't have a beginning and an end by a disaster, but are there and amongst our community always?
Well, look, I sometimes hear this cliche, we're better together. And then what does that actually look like to kind of outwork that? But I think we are, as the church of our cities, as the church of New Zealand, I think we're starting to recognise more than ever that we can be better together. And I think that people in our churches, they want to help, they want to serve, they want to love in the midst of a crisis, whether that's immediate or whether that's slower moving, where there's need there, where there's lack, where there's need. I think people want to help. And I think people in some ways are looking for permission and opportunities to do so. And I think as pastors, I think there's a brilliant and vital and such a formational role in really providing that permission and that opportunity to serve, to love, and to bless those in needs in our city as well.
I certainly think that's the case. And so thank you, Amy and Andrew, for your wonderful story, and to all of the pastors and churches of Napier. God bless you. And Ben, for your perspective as we explore this and that inherent challenge of serving our communities all together rather than individually. We're going to be back in a few moments exploring some more important things, particularly what we individually can do as churches and as pastors to make some of these things happen. So we will be right back.
Let's face it, pastoring is a tough gig, but you don't have to go it alone. Solace offers spiritual direction, supervision, and retreats for pastors across Aotearoa. Spaces for you to reflect, be heard, reconnect with God, and set new horizons. So whether you're thriving, just holding it together, or anywhere in between, visit solace.org.nz, proud sponsor of the Four Pastors podcast, together championing you and your holy calling in an uncertain world.
Welcome back to Andrew and Amy Dishran from Napier and Ben Mai from Auckland as we explore ways of growing a heart, not just for our own church, but for the city or town or place in which God has planted us. Now, Ben, looking back over everything we've talked about today, what do you think God is teaching the church through all of this?
Such a good question, Vic. Look, I think there's three words that come to mind, and I think these are kind of Jesus words or kingdom words, I reckon. So the three words are around unity, are around humility, and are around active service. We haven't talked too much about humility, but what I've discovered or observed is that unity amongst pastors grows at the speed of relational trust between pastors. And I think relationally trusting one another just requires such a healthy dose of humility. And yeah, instead of talking about the attendance and the buildings and the cash and so on, let's come together and talk about how we disciple our city together. How do we love and bless our city together? And that, I think, is a great perspective to take.
Fantastic. Andrew, maybe we'll ask you about trust. How can pastors begin building trust with each other?
I think asking personal questions, getting to know each other personally, what you're interested in. At the end of the day, it's really important that you treat another pastor as just another human being. I like to banter. I like to crack jokes. But I also ask questions like, how's your ministry going? And also never talk about how big your church is. It doesn't matter. It's more like, how are you and how's your family? How's your church? And that builds trust.
What is the first step, do you think, or the first steps if a pastor is listening and they hardly even know the pastor down the road, or maybe even they have a bit of history with them, which might be unfortunate or somewhat negative? What are some of the steps that we could take just to make those initial steps towards making something happen?
So most likely in your region, our pastors getting together and praying. And so I would start asking around, find where you can connect in with others. And I know for us, we love it when new people come. We love it when a new pastor comes and gathers. And then our exhortation to you would be commit and go every single time that you can. Bump everything else off your calendar and start the year, put it on and commit to going, because if you only go once every now and then, you won't receive what you could and you won't be able to give what you can either.
Ben, Amy mentions prayer and praying together. Why do you think that prayer is so important, and how does that change relationships even before we can expect to change a city?
I think prayer changes our heart before it changes our circumstances. That's true, I think, at an individual level, and I think it's true at kind of a corporate level as well. And I think why that is because coming before God in prayer really does require humility. We're really posturing ourselves before God and just surrendering to Him really as we pray. And I think that's where it changes our heart. And then we start to do that, corporately as a group of pastors or just as a group of believers across our city, across our community. There's just something beautiful when we all take that posture. And I think God's Spirit just kind of works through that and really unifies us. So I really do believe that prayer is a brilliant and perhaps a kind of a low-hanging fruit way as well of kind of coming together in unity as the body of Christ in our city. The Napier guys are doing that brilliantly well around the kind of the Pentecost season and during other seasons as well. And honestly, I think prayer, is just something that kind of breaks down barriers, and it's something beautiful about that, a brilliant starting point, like you say, and such a vital starting point as well, of course, Vic.
Andrew, what do churches have to lay down in order to do this work together?
Yeah, I think for a pastor, the cost is time. You do have to invest time. I think we all would admit that there is plenty of work to do out there just in your church alone. But I think prioritizing, in our context, the monthly gathering of pastors collectively, you could see the ones who are invested. And the fruitfulness is that when something comes up like a natural disaster, you have a voice, you have something to speak into. And we found that the ones who consistently would come to the meetings, when something came up, when a disaster came up and it required a decision to be made, their voice counted. And it didn't matter how big or small their church or ministry or their influence was. And the ones that weren't there, they made an effort, but it was harder for them to engage.
Amy, how do churches maintain unique identities while sharing this common missional view of their city or their area?
Yeah. Andrew's dad, David Dishran, and I really want to credit him because he trained us and raised us in a lot of this, and was both his parents, David and Andrew, were amazing unity people. And so I think we watched him display this and model this, where he loved our church as a whole, and it didn't take away from what we had as a church ourselves. And so I think it's only gain, really, for working together. Our new friend, Greg Whittaker, who came over and did some training with us recently, said we walk together on all things, but we work together on some things. And that's a really powerful line, that we can be united. Doesn't mean you have to do everything.
Yeah. Anything you'd say, Amy, to a pastor who sort of thinks, I'm actually worried about losing some of my people to another church?
I think that pastors, it's very important to hold our churches with open hands, no matter what. They're not our people, they're the Lord's, and we are under shepherds under him. So maybe that touches an insecurity that we probably all have because we love our people. But I think it really hasn't been concerned for us because we're all one big family. And I think at the end of the day, somebody really felt that another church that we worked collaboratively on fit them better. And maybe that's a blessing to that church for us. And I think, maybe again, that's what's been modeled by Andrew's parents, to hold people with open hands.
Ben, what kind of things are actually better done together?
I think as a pastor, if you think ahead to your next season, it might be your next week or your next month, or maybe even looking at the annual calendar, a potentially useful filter to think about is like this. Is this thing a me thing, or is it a we thing? Is it a me thing or a we thing? So here would be examples of me things. So me things would be like, this is about our church. And at our own church, this coming Sunday, we have our annual general meeting, our AGM. Now that's a me thing. That's our church. We're not going to bring 5 other churches into that context. Or the week after next is an elders meeting. That's a me thing for our church. But then later on in the year, we're holding in Mangere Bridge a big bridge party, which is like the Halloween alternative party on the 31st of October. That's an opportunity to do a we thing. Together as churches in our local context, we could actually come together and really bless and serve the community. Or what about running Alpha? Maybe we could actually run Alpha together as multiple churches, or we could take kind of term about. So our church does it one term, the next church does it the next term, things like that. And so I think you start to think about particularly your community-facing aspects. So many of them can actually be we things rather than me things. And I think when we start to do we things, we start to share resources, we start to share ideas, we start to lighten the burden on our own church and our own volunteers. And I think that's an exciting thing that creates a lot of potential for us.
Andrew and Amy, I want to get you to imagine for a moment your city, Napier. It's 10 years' time. Your pastors are gathering together, and as you have been praying for the city, what would you anticipate? What would show to you that, hey, this is the thing that we've been praying for all of these years?
I think some of that discussions that we're having together right now are percolating in our hearts about what does mission look like for us doing something together. I would love to see in 10 years' time that flourishing. I would love to see more pastors in the room. I would love to see, and I think we'd all agree, we want to see a revival or a renewal or a pouring out of God's Spirit. But I'd like to see that in every church, because the reality is we're going to need all churches, because we're all praying for the same thing. And so we're all believing for the same thing. So where we can, let's work together on that.
Yeah. I think after 10 years of prayer and faith and collective mind together, I think seeing people across in our regional space finding hope in Jesus, and the evidence of that showing across our land of decreased evil and increased love, that would do my heart good. People living life worthy of the calling they've received, just people empowered across our region.
Certainly something to pray for and something to be together over, I'm sure. Ben, if pastors across New Zealand caught this vision, what do you think could change? Think big picture for a moment.
Yeah. Oh, look, so exciting. Here's what I think around our current kind of nation, our society, our cities, is that we increasingly live in a divided society, don't we? People refute one another. They disagree with no measure of grace. They put up battle lines. Social media has a lot to answer for here. And I don't think it's doing us any good, Vic, to be honest. And I think about churches. I think about vision for discipling and loving our cities. I think about, obviously, the Great Commission of go and make disciples. But what about a strategy of unity, of kind of doing it together, being unified in relationship and spirit and deed? And I think that's really countercultural. But I think it's so very attractive to our communities, to non-believers in our communities, across our cities, across our nation. And so I think as a strategy for mission, I think being in unity and being united can be really powerful and indeed kind of city changing and nation changing.
Thank you. Well, on this podcast, I ask all of our guests a question about hope. So, Ben, what gives you hope?
Look, yesterday morning, I got to hang out for a little bit with a bunch of 20-somethings who were sold out for Jesus. And that gave me hope. That gave me hope when I heard stories about the way the good news of Jesus is reaching young people across our nation in universities and workplaces and secondary schools. That gave me hope. Something else I think that is part of the strategy there, as I heard them talking about different kind of youth ministries, is just the sense of like, there's no walls here. There's no competition here. Like, we're all on the same team. Kind of sounds cringy, but we're Team Jesus here. There's so much more that kind of unites us together that is common to us than is different to us. And so I think I was just so encouraged to hear that of let's put aside our labels, our banners, our brands, our denominational differences, and let's come together with the mission of Jesus. And it gives me a lot of hope for what might be possible amongst our church and amongst our nation.
Amy, Andrew, what gives you hope?
I agree with you on that, Ben, like looking at our teenagers, our daughters and their friends and what's happening amongst that generation is wild. They are just sold out to Jesus and they're seeing cool things. I think what has given me hope is that people like yourself, pastors that have done the work, we're not trying things here, we're getting to stand on the hard work of years and years of sowing into ministry and probably so many prayers prayed that we're getting to walk out. We're mentored very closely by Ivan Bazant from Salvation Army, and he has just tirelessly served in these kind of areas of bringing together people. And I think, man, in proper time, we're going to see a harvest of so many people. That gives me hope.
Thank you. Andrew?
I'm going to say it like this. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. And we can look at that and feel like, oh man, I'm doing this on my own. But when I get around my brothers and sisters, we're not alone. And then the solution is we just need to pray to the Lord of the harvest. And so there is a harvest. It's happening right now. You're not alone. We can do this together. We're better together than being apart. And there's a lot more good out there than there is bad.
Well, thank you, all of you. Another thing that I ask our guests here to do is to pray for our pastors of New Zealand, and increasingly around the world, people seem to be listening to our podcast. So, Andrew, you mentioned prayer there, and so I wonder if you'd lead us off, and maybe Amy and Ben could finish up. That would be great.
Yeah, Heavenly Father, we first of all, we just want to humble ourselves, and even the things that we've spoken about today. Father, I pray that whoever's listening to this, Lord, whatever your Spirit wants to highlight to them right now, Lord, would you do that? And may we as pastors put down our titles, put down our brands, our names, and Lord, may we just submit ourselves one to another and be a blessing to one another and help encourage and strengthen each other for your glory, so that the world would know that we are one. I just pray for every person listening to this that, God, you would do something powerful in their spirit, whether they are regularly attending or maybe they're not, but whatever it looks like in their local context, Lord, would you speak to them right now, in Jesus' name?
Yes, Lord, I thank you so much for the love that you have. And I pray that you would continue to pour into our church more love for other churches, other pastors in our regions too. Got a picture you showed me years ago. It was like a bird's eye view of our nation, and these pockets of fire just burning in small places, in small regions, all spread across Aotearoa. And as those flames burn brighter and we connected together, just that light of Jesus would cover our land. And I pray that not only over our nation, but over all the nations of the world, Lord, that as Christians come together, we work together, that fire would burn brighter and brighter from being together, that we would be encouraged by one another, Lord, and that your name, Jesus, your name would be spread across the world, that all would hear and have opportunity to come into faith with you. We bless these pastors. We're grateful for them. We pray for their family. We pray for their needs, Lord. I pray that you would release the abundance of your love and provision.
As you listen today, just receive this blessing. It comes from Numbers chapter 6. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Amen. Well, thank you, all of you, Amy, Andrew, Ben. Thank you for being able to see the big picture and not just your own patch, for celebrating and championing others, even as you follow the call of God on your own lives, for having a vision which encompasses cities and towns and beyond, for realizing that we are indeed better together, and for being willing to advocate for that. And so we champion you too, and your holy callings in this uncertain world. God bless you. It's been a great pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
So grateful. Thank you for the blessing you are to us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vic. God bless.
God bless. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Four Pastors podcast. You can find out more about us in the podcast notes. And while you're at it, how about liking or rating this podcast and passing it on to a pastor you know who may benefit? Meanwhile, I'm back in a fortnight with something different again, talking about activism and justice. Just where do they fit within the life of the local church? I hope you'll join me. Bless you.